Looks like we're good. All right. Well, hello everyone. So before we begin, how was Chapter 5 for all of you? So far,
Um,
at the very least.
Not bad.
Not bad?
Wait, what's chapter 5?
Yeah, Chapter 5 for this week is what 151 is going over, I do believe. So, you guys are learning about adjectives in the beginning. That's a very important concept introduced here. So yeah, I guess let's just work our way through. Before we start, does anybody have any more pressing questions that you'd like addressed at the beginning? No? Okay, well, like always, feel free to interject at any point if you have a question. That's what we're here for, so please do. So there's two categories of adjectives in Japanese, right? There's adjectives and there's not adjectives. And when they modify a noun, like it says here, ends an adjective and not ends a not adjective. So you never would really see an adjective just on its own written without there. So for example, omoshiroi on its own is omoshiroi. But not adjectives like Genki I, sensei, an energetic teacher, if they were to stand on its own, not modifying something, it would just be Genki. Now that's because not adjectives are pretty much just nouns. So that's not universally true. Like you can't necessarily just take a noun and make it a not adjective. But for the most part, you can take a not adjective and make it a noun. So you'll see that as you go through. But some examples of the adjectives that are provided here. So omoshiroi eiga, right? An interesting movie. Kowai sensei, right? So kowai is a pretty important one here compared to a similar word. It almost sounds the same in English. You guys probably know the adjective kawaii, right? Which means cute. Very common in anime and dramas and manga. But Americans tend to kind of not emphasize those vowel sounds. So I recommend all of you, while you are still fairly new to learning Japanese, make sure you always pronounce your adjectives consistently. So if I were to say this word in English, I might say, kawaii, right? And that sounds a lot like kawaii, which is cute, right? So you need, especially with differentiations like ko and ka, you need to be very explicitly clear. So kawaii and kowai, right? I've had many times that my friends mistook me for saying, "Oh, your clothes are scary," and they got a little offended. I mean, obviously they knew it was a mistake, but they were like, "Did you mean to say that my shirt is scary?" And so just be careful with that. So to use an adjective, you just plop it right before the noun. Pretty simple. For not adjectives, you plop it right before the noun, but you have to have that little not there to show what's being modified. This is not a particle, I don't think. This is just a grammatical necessity. So they talk about how the adjectives change shape here. So omoshiroi, being interesting or funny, becomes omoshiroi desu. That is the affirmative. You just plop desu on it. Pretty simple. Just like you'd say oishii desu, right? Oishii is an adjective. To do the negative, in my version of the textbook, we have the less modern version here. So in your textbook, if you're following along in the modern version of Genki, you'll see the example samui desu, and the negative of that is samukunai desu, or samuku arimasen. So they only show the arimasen form here. But if you ever need to conjugate to nai, you just chop off that i and make it kunai, right? So samui becomes samukunai, kawaii becomes kawaii kunai, right? Kowai becomes kowakunai. Past tense for adjectives, you drop off the i and make it kata. So in this example here, omoshiroi becomes omoshirokata or omoshirokata desu, right? In the textbook you have samui, so samukata desu. This one, to do the negative past tense, can be a little bit difficult to pronounce in many cases. So samui becomes samukunakatta desu, or just samukunakatta. So i just becomes kunakatta. So that's not too hard with a word like samui. When you get a word like atatakai, it's frustratingly difficult to say something like atataku nakatta, right? Atataku nakatta, or similar. But you get used to it. Not usually a problem. So let's see. Let's see what your textbook says. Yeah, so there's an exception here, which is the word "e," right? So "e" means good. So "iega" is a good movie, right? So let's take a look at why this is. That it's different. So the word "e" is actually sort of just a different pronunciation of the word "yoi," which comes up, you'll see here on Jisho, yoi. So yeah, the word "e" is actually usually written yoi, but there's all kinds of different pronunciations you'll see down here. There's a and all kinds of alternate kanji. So you might have heard the word kakkoi before. It's common to call someone handsome, or you might hear it in anime. The e at the end there is this e. It's yoi, right? And so the past tense of e, even though in affirmative, like you see in the book or here on screen, even though the present tense is e, the past tense becomes yo. So instead of becoming ikatta desu, it becomes yokatta desu. Or instead of ikunai, it becomes yokunai, right? Or yokunakatta, right? So not really any other exceptions that I'm aware of other than that. Usually just yoi. Not adjectives. Like I mentioned before, they are literally just nouns. So the affirmative versus the negative is exactly the same as a noun. So genki desu, that's just saying it is genki, right? Like you learned before for nouns. Genki janai, or genki janai desu, or genki ja arimasen. It is not genki, right? She is not genki. Past tense is deshita, or datta, or janakatta desu for the negative past tense, or ja arimasen deshita for the past tense. So this is literally just the same as nouns, because they are nouns. They specify here, yeah, you don't have that na there if it's just standing on its own. So you only need the na if it's modifying a noun. Let's see. Do you guys have any questions before we move on?
Nope.
No? Okay, cool. So this next section is digging into some specifics about two interesting adjectives in Japanese that are very common. So in English, we say, for example, I like ice cream, right? And that is a transitive verb. You like ice cream. You are acting on the ice cream by liking it, right? The ice cream is the object of the sentence. But in Japanese, expressing some things that tend to be verbs in English are actually adjectives. So suki here means like, but you express it as an adjective. So to say I like ice cream in Japanese, it's not a verb. You say watashi wa ice cream ga suki desu. The example in your book, you have a lot of examples here. So we have Takeshi likes coffee a lot. So daisuki is just the character big next to ski. So daisuki is to love and ski is to like. If you say this to a person, if you say that you ski a person, it's generally romantic. You can still ski your friends, but it's not necessarily without romantic implications most of the time. So Takeshi-san wa kohi ga suki desu, or Takeshi-san wa kohi ga daisuki desu, right? So to express that you like something, you add the thing you like, and then ga, and then suki desu. So kurasu ga suki desu. I like the class. And the sentence structure is a little strange from an English-speaking perspective because you're used to it being a verb. So the way to construct this, let's look at the one on the screen. So Robert likes his Japanese classes. Robato-san wa. So as for Roboto-san, right, as for Robert, Robato-san wa Nihongo no kurasu ga. So that's marking this as the subject. This is marking the Japanese class, Nihongo no kurasu, as the subject. Ga suki desu. So because you have this ga here, it's modifying the subject here. This would be literally translated as for Robert, Japanese classes are liked, right? Kind of a really awkward sentence structure, but that is how you use adjectives in Japanese. So you could say 好きなクラス, right? A class that is liked. But if you use adjectives to modify something, if you want to put the adjective after it, like to explain it, you put a ga there. So, for example, アイスクリームが美味しいです. Right? アイスクリームが美味しい. So if it comes after, you use a ga there. Now you could just say 美味しいアイスクリーム, which means delicious ice cream. So you could say even 美味しいアイスクリームが好きです. Right? So I like delicious ice cream. Let's see. Kirai is used exactly the same way as ski, except it means dislike. And daikirai is to hate something, to very much dislike something. Now, it's not necessarily culturally common to say that you kirai something in Japanese culture, because that's a little too direct for a lot of people. So I remember in one of the first chapters, you guys learned the adverb amari. Do you guys remember amari? So if it's not nice to say that you dislike something, that you kirai something, how do you think you would say that you don't particularly like something? How would you guys express that using amari? And this is a non-rhetorical question. If anybody knows, feel free to try to answer. So
It would be あまり好きじゃないです, right?
yeah, exactly. Amari suki janai desu. So if you don't like ice cream, if you're insane and don't like ice cream, then you can say 私はあんまりアイスクリームが好きじゃない, or アイスクリームがあんまり好きじゃない, which means I don't particularly like ice cream. And in English, that sounds like, well, but you still don't dislike it, right? But in Japanese, usually if you say that, that probably means you dislike it. Yeah. So, let us continue. So you have mashol and mashol ka as number 3 in your version of the book. So we will jump onto here, but I'll have it on screen as well. So, this is the long volitional form, is the name of this grammar construct. This is one of the most useful things you will learn in terms of conjugations. You'll see this all the time in Japan. So you guys know the mas form of the verb. If you replace mas with mashol or mashol ka, you can say things like let's or shall. So, アイスクリームを食べます meaning shall, or sorry, アイスクリームを食べます meaning to eat ice cream. アイスクリームを食べましょう means let's eat ice cream, right? You can add that mashol to any verb. Let me think. So, bubble tea is called tapioca in Japanese. So, タピオカを飲みましょう. Let's drink bubble tea. If you add ka at the end, it makes it a question. So, タピオカを飲みましょうか means shall we drink bubble tea? And it's literally as simple as just replacing the mas with mashol, with the exception of suru becoming shimashol. And I guess that's not really an exception because suru becomes shimas on its own. This is very useful. So you guys learned how to say together, I believe in the last chapter. So how would you say... let me think. Let's go to the library with Sensei. Can someone try that? Anybody? All right. So that would be Sensei to toshokan ni ikimashou. Right? Sensei to toshokan ni ikimashou. This is very useful. Okay. Next in this chapter is counting. Counters. So, counters are something that often frustrates people. People seem to think that this is an exclusively Japanese thing. So before we get into that explanation, let's look a little bit at how they work. The example here is リーさんは切手を3枚買いました. Right? That means Lee-san bought 3 stamps. So if you look at this sentence here, Ri-san wa. So Li is the subject. Sorry, Li is the topic, rather. Kite being stamps. O 3枚 kaimashita. So if you cut out that 3枚 there, that just changes the meaning to Lee bought stamps, right? But if you want to add a quantity, you put that quantity right before the verb, after the o. And this 3枚, so san is 3, and mai is a counting object used for sheets of paper and other flat objects. This is also used for things like photographs, even digital photographs, because originally all photographs were flat sheets of paper, right? So they just continued using it. Now people look at this and say, why the heck do you have a number used to count flat sheets of paper? That seems kind of silly. We do the same thing in English, though. So I wouldn't say, give me 3 soups in most contexts. I wouldn't go to a restaurant and say 3 soups, please. I would say 3 bowls of soup, or 3 cups of soup, or 3 pitchers of soup, or 3 spoonfuls of soup. All of those are counterwords in English, just the same. The difference is the counterwords that are commonly attached to things are different in Japanese, and you have to put one there. So they have counterwords for things that are long, for things that are flat, for small things, for big animals, for small animals. There's all kinds of them. There's hundreds of them. There's one that you can use if you don't know the proper counter to use. That's tsu, like hitotsu, futatsu. You guys have learned those words already, I believe. But you generally have to use some form of counter. So I'd recommend not looking at it as some silly, unnecessary thing that's exclusive to Japanese, because we do that in English too. There's just some exceptions that you don't have to necessarily do that. So I believe that's the end of grammar for chapter 5. This was a short but important chapter grammar-wise. A lot of pretty big, complicated concepts in here. So before we move on to, I guess we'll do maybe some vocab next. Do you guys have any grammar questions? It can be about the last chapter or this chapter.
Maybe not a question. I'm just wondering why they waited so long to give the informal version of like volitional forms.
So the informal version?
Yeah, like iko versus ikimashou.
I would say the reasoning behind that coming later in the book is probably because usually the informal conjugations are a bit more complicated. They require more modification based on the last character in that word. And I think that's the same reason why they waited to do the short past tense as well, because it's a lot easier to conjugate just mas to mashita versus conjugating, like iku to ita, but then for some reason, kiku becomes kita, right? There's more rules there, so I don't know why they waited. It seems like it would make sense to introduce that all at once. Just a stylistic choice, I suppose. But yeah, like you were saying, so shimas, you can just conjugate that to shimashou, but you can also conjugate that to shiou. So suru becomes shiou, and shimas becomes shimashou, for example. And that can be true of every verb. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I've wondered in Genki a lot of the time why they do things like that. They wait a long time to introduce like plural pronouns and things like that. I mean, obviously pronouns are not particularly often used in Japanese, but it surprises me when they choose to introduce some things.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or threats? No? Okay. Well, let us go through some of the nouns here, or rather vocabulary, and perhaps all of them. If there's anything that is not on the version on screen in the textbook that you guys are using in class, please do stop me. So we have umi, which means sea. If you look at this kanji here, that little left bit means river, so you can kind of you'll often see this with water-related words. Kite means postal stamps. Kipu means ticket. Now, kipu is generally only used these days for airplane tickets. So you'd say hikoki no kipu, airplane ticket. But if you're talking about concert tickets or most other forms of tickets, it's probably more common to say chiketto in Japanese. That's my understanding at the very least. Seems that this word's kind of fallen out of style. My book, yeah, okay, yours has that too. Surfing. That's a kind of cute sounding word, I think. Surfing. So to go surfing would be like surfing o shi ni ikimasu, or surfing ni ikimasu, right? Shukudai is homework. You guys will probably best remember this one because now that you've learned this, sensei is very likely to say something like shukudai onegai shimasu and not say it in English. I guess since you're doing online classes right now, that won't happen, but shukudai is an important word for in-class time to be listening to. Tabemono is food. You probably already know this word, but tabe comes from taberu, and then mono means thing. You can add this to a lot of words. This is the stem form of the taberu verb. So the stem form of the verb nomu, to drink, is nomi, right? Nomimasu. Chop off the mas. And you can add mono to that. Nomimono is drink, like you have down here. There's other mono, but those are the ones you'll need to know for now. Like, I guess kaimono, you learned last chapter, I think. Tanjoubi is birthday. So you can say, O tanjoubi omedetou gozaimasu. Happy birthday. Testo. There's a more formal word for test that is used to mean exam, which is shiken. Testo has sort of the nuance of a small test, a quiz, usually. So keep that in mind. Tenki is weather. It's kind of interesting compound. The first bit here, ten, means heaven, and ki means air. Nomimono, we just went over. Hagaki is postcard. Ha means leaf, and gaki comes from kaku, or kakimasu, meaning to write. Bus is just bus, pretty straightforward. Fun fact, bus stop is basite, so you might see that written on a sign, or if you've ever seen that iconic picture of Totoro, from My Neighbor Totoro, with a bus stop. I believe the sign says basite. Hikoki is airplane. We just mentioned airplanes, so hikoki no kipu is an airplane ticket. Heya is room. You can use this to refer to a room in a building or your own room. Watashi no heya is my room. Kurasu no heya. Technically, there's a room, like a room for a class, a specific word that means classroom, like an instructional room. But you could say Watashi no kurasu no heya wa hiroi desu. My class's room is wide, for example. Boku means I. This is used by men. It's usually used by men that don't particularly mean to sound masculine. It's kind of a soft word, often used by like middle school aged boys, like shonen culture in particular. It's not a very masculine word. Best to avoid it unless you want to intentionally put off some kind of image and you're aware of what that image is. It's completely proper to use, but usually recommended to avoid. Yasumi is holiday or day off or absence. Comes from the verb yasumu. So yasumimasu means to take a rest, but you could add any season here, for example, and it would be, for example, summer break is natsu yasumi. So you just plop that on there. You could also say kyou wa yasumi desu. So like today is a day off, right? Ryoko. Ryoko is travel. You might recognize the kanji for iku in there. So now we're getting into adjectives. So now that you guys know how to conjugate these adjectives and to use them properly, you're going to be getting a lot more of them. And later on, we'll do some more adjective practice. But atarashi is new. So a new video game, for example, will be atarashi game. Atsui is hot in terms of weather, and atsui in terms of a thing is written with a different kanji. So if you are writing these in kanji, be sure to differentiate them, but they're pronounced exactly the same. So tenki is the word for weather. We learned that just a minute ago. So 今日は暑いです or 今日の天気は暑いです or 天気が暑いです right? You can say the tea is hot. So お茶が暑いです or お茶は暑いです Busy in terms of people or days is 忙しい So we learned before how to use ちょっと meaning a little bit. So if somebody says 今日は休みですか Is today a day off? You say いいえ今日はちょっと忙しい Meaning no, today's a little bit busy actually. 大きい is large. This is one of those words that I would highly recommend emphasizing that longer 大きい, right? Because you do have to put those two o's there to mean big. Be careful of that. It's often people often misspell. 面白い is interesting. It can also mean funny. So if something is 面白い, it can be interesting or funny, like 面白い映画. Kowai is frightening. We learned that before. Samui is cold, and specifically in terms of weather. You don't use samui to say この飲み物は寒いです Right? You wouldn't say that. You would say 今日の天気が寒いです Right? 楽しい is fun. So if somebody says, hey, how's the new PlayStation 5? You can say 楽しい or 楽しいよ The opposite of 大きい, which we learned up here, is 小さい So that means something is small. つまらない is boring. 古い is old. This is for things only. You wouldn't use that for people. You couldn't call somebody 古い. It more specifically means from long time ago. 難しい is difficult. So この漢字が難しい right? This kanji is difficult. So I personally use the word 難しい a lot. You see a lot of people online say, 英語が難しい or like, my English studying, it's so difficult. 優しい means easy or kind. So you could say このゲームが優しい right? This game is easy. Or you could say この人は優しい right? This person is kind. 安い means cheap in terms of like an object or something you want to buy. So if you wanted to say the new PlayStation is not cheap, you could say 新しいPlayStationが安くないよ. The new PlayStation is not cheap. The opposite of that being 高い, which I think is last chapter vocabulary. So we have some not adjectives here. We have 嫌い. So you could say アイスクリームが嫌いです. I don't like ice cream, which I don't think anybody's ever said except my dad. He seems to somehow be the only person I've ever met that doesn't like ice cream. But I guess there's people that don't like ice cream. See, 綺麗 is beautiful or clean. It technically means clean, but they just use the word clean to refer to beautiful things in Japan. I guess that's why so many things are clean there. You could say... let me think of an example. So, 海が綺麗です. The ocean is beautiful. Or you could say, 私の部屋が綺麗です. My room is clean. Genki means energetic or healthy. So that's the name of the textbook that we're reading, obviously. But somebody that is not sick, that is happy and excited, would be a genki na hito, a genki person, right? That's kind of a hard word to translate to English. It has a nuance to it. It's a little different from healthy and energetic. You'll see this used to often refer to young people. Shizuka is quiet. So you'll often see this literally written on signs in residential areas, like shizuka ni suru, like please be quiet, because you're not really supposed to be too loud, like walking the streets in residential areas. So important word to know. Ski or ski na mono is to be fond of or to like something. So これが好きです, right? I like this. To hate is daikirai, and to love is daisuki. Just add dai to kirai and ski. Pretty straightforward. Let us continue. They have lively here. Nigiyaka na. I can't say I've ever used this word, but there it is. Let's see. My book has the word for handsome in there. I don't think you really use that anymore. Hima is to be not busy or to be free, to have a lot of time. So if somebody asks you, Konshu wa isogashii, is this week busy for you? You can say, Iie, hima desu. No, it's free, right? No, I'm not busy. So we're getting just a few new verbs this chapter. We have to swim, which is oyogu. Becomes oyogimasu. We have kiku, which means to ask. This also means to listen. So, sensei ni shitsumon o kikimashou. Let's ask sensei a question. Noru is to ride or to board. So the most useful example of this is to ride a train. Now, unlike most verbs, you're not using o here. This is not necessarily a transitive verb. So to say to ride a train, in English that's transitive, but in Japanese you don't say densha o noru. You say densha ni noru. So densha ni norimashou. Let's get on the train. Yaru is to do or to perform. Just like you can say geimu o suru, which means to play a game, you can say geimu o yaru in some cases, and similar things like that. It sounds a little more rude in my opinion. It's like let's game versus, or let's do a game, or let's do a movie versus let's watch a movie. You can use this, but there's usually a more specific verb. Dekakeru is to go out. So an example for this would be your friend can ask, I don't know. You're sitting at the breakfast table with your friend, and they say, what are you going to do today? You can say, ima dekakemasu yo. So I'm going out right now. I'm leaving. That's it for the verbs. We have some adverbs. Issho ni, very important ones. You guys learned to before. So, tomodachi to issho ni shopping mall ni ikimasu. The nuance between just using to and then to issho ni is to say I went to the store with my friend versus I went to the store together with my friend. This is very common to use with the volitional form that we learned in this chapter. So if you're hanging out with a friend and want to go to Starbucks, I don't know if they do, you can say issho ni Starbucks ni ikimashou. Issho ni Starbucks ni ikimashou. Sorekara is a conjunction, or I guess maybe it could be at the beginning of a sentence too, but it's still kind of a conjunction. So I could say, 一緒にスターバックスに行きましょう。それからショッピングモールにも行きましょう. So let's go to Starbucks, and then let's also go to the mall. Very useful there. 大丈夫. I imagine most of you have heard this word. The meaning and history of it is quite weird. It means like, what, big husband or something? Big master? I'm not really sure. But it literally means okay. So if you slip and fall in a store in Japan, they'll immediately say, hey, 大丈夫? And then you can say, 大丈夫だよ. This word is so incredibly useful. If you're checking out at a grocery store and they ask you if you want a bag, for example, and you say 大丈夫, they'll not give you a bag. If they ask if you have, I don't know, like any coupons or something, you can just say, 大丈夫. I mean, that'd be a little kind of weird, I think, but the point of that being, if you don't understand what somebody said and they're asking you to make a decision on something, a lot of the time you can get away with just saying 大丈夫, and it saved me in a few situations where I have no idea what somebody asked me. So very, very useful. You wouldn't necessarily use this to say like about a movie, like how's the movie? Oh, it's okay. You wouldn't say 大丈夫. So just keep that in mind. Totemo is very. You place this before an adjective and it emphasizes it. So you can say totemo kawaii or totemo oishii or all kinds of different uses there. There's other examples like mecha or cho kawaii, mecha kawaii, totemo kawaii. Lots of emphasis words you can use there. Donna is what kind of. So this is good to pair here with the adjectives. So I could say, どんな食べ物が好きですか? What kind of food do you like? And you can say, 美味しい食べ物が好き. I like delicious food. Or, 熱い食べ物が好きです. You can say, I like warm food. I like hot food. And then I teach you a counter here. Mai, we learned before. So, 1枚, 2枚, 3枚, so forth. So, 3枚の写真 is 3 pictures. So, 切符を3枚買いましょう. Sorry, 買いましょう. Would be, let's buy, did I say 3枚? So 3 tickets. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. We have mare here. So mare can be used a lot of the time the same way that you can use ni. I can't think of a specific example here. So, okay, so 明日まで勉強しています. I am studying till tomorrow. 明日まで勉強します. I will study till tomorrow. Made pretty much means to or until or to the point that, so forth. So, quite useful, I do believe.
Bryce,
What's up?
so I actually had a question about kind of the vocabulary for this lesson.
Absolutely.
And so is there like a verb to say like to travel, or for now do we just say like, Ryoko o shimasu?
So that
Shimasu or something like that.
ryoko is the verb. You would say ryoko suru, yeah. So they haven't really explicitly taught this, so this is a good question, and thank you for bringing this up, because this does kind of help clear this up. So the proper way to say to travel is ryoko suru or ryoko o suru, but usually just ryoko suru. But a suru verb is just a noun with suru at the end of it. So we can look up here and you see surfing, for example, surfing.
Yeah.
You could say surfing suru, surfing shimashou, let's go surfing, right? So a lot of nouns, you can just plop suru at the end of it, and it does literally just mean to noun, like to travel, to surf.
So
ryoko.
do you need, would you need like I noticed that you said like you didn't use like the O particle. So would you need to use it? Like,
so generally there's words that are often referred to as verbs, and you wouldn't use the o there. So I would just say ryoko suru, ryoko shimasu. Things that you might, for example, to play a game. So a video game in Japanese is geimu, right? Traditionally, you would say geimu o suru, like to do a game. Let's play a game. But it's become more common as people are increasingly using it as a verb to drop that o and just say geimu suru, right? So just like in English, we'd say let's play a game, but these days people might say something like, oh, I'm gaming with my friends. You don't say I'm playing a game with my friends. You just say I'm gaming with my friends. It's becoming increasingly popular to drop the o in nouns that are used with suru often. So ryoko, it would be weird to see o used there. Surfing, it would be probably about equally likely to see it both ways.
okay. Yeah, that was just my question because like I was just trying to practice like to actually speak Japanese.
Absolutely.
And I was looking at it, I'm like, there's no verb for travel, so I was just wondering that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, it literally is just the noun. So yeah, good guess. And so for example, you could say travel to America. That would be America ni ryoko shimasu, right? Or Nihon ni ryoko shimasu. So an example of this, you'll see this here. Let's go back to Jisho here. So if we type ryoko in here, you see that the dictionary actually lists it as a noun and a pseudo verb. So it will usually list these if they can be used both ways, not always. But if you go here and look at the examples, you'll see ryoko o suru used here, but then right here, right below it, ryoko suru. Right, so traveling by boat is a lot of fun. It's dull to travel by ship. But yeah, lots and lots of nouns can be used as verbs. And the history behind this, if anybody cares, is...
I care.
Okay, I'm glad you care. I'm glad somebody cares. These two kanji compound words are generally of Chinese origin, and it makes it more formal. But because they are of Chinese origin, they don't really have a native Japanese conjugation. The short forms of verbs are generally native Japanese conjugations. But because they're Chinese words, they don't have a native Japanese conjugation. So you plop pseudo on it to these Chinese words, and it becomes a verb. Now, I can't 100% vouch that this is in particular a Chinese origin word. It could just be a compound word that's been constructed later. But with Chinese origin words, which are usually used as a more formal version, it's usually pseudo at the end of it. So there's kao is to buy, and then there's a more formal word for to buy. I believe it is new. It's to purchase. So to buy versus to purchase. It's that level of formality. I think it's new. Well, unimportant for the time being, but yeah, so that's a little bit of the history there. But are there any more questions about grammar, vocabulary, anything?
I have another one.
Yeah.
And it was about like Watashi and then like Boku. Because this guy, like in today's class, he used Boku. And I was like, I didn't know that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked it up, and apparently they said that you don't, believe it or not, like Watashi's, like guys don't say it a lot or something. And like I know Ida Sensei was okay with it. Like she was okay with like if you said Boku, but I just want to make sure that like it's in the right way.
So it is proper. It has meaning that Watashi doesn't, right? So Watashi means just me, just personal pronoun. You could be a girl, you could be a boy, you could be an old man, you could be a kid, you could be an old woman, you could be anything, right? You could be an emperor, you could be a peasant. You can use Watashi. Boku carries the explicit meaning that you are male, first of all, and a particular kind of male, generally a young male, older than a child, but younger than middle-aged kind of meaning. And strangely, you see it used by girls in music sometimes, and I don't really understand why that is, but if you say boku wa ice cream ga suki desu, right? I like ice cream.
Yeah.
You are intentionally conveying that you see yourself as a young male. The opposite of that would be ore, which you've probably heard yakuza or gangsters or tough men use in TV shows and movies and such. That carries the meaning that you are a person that sees yourself as a tough, masculine guy. So the kind of people that use ore would not be caught dead using boku for the most part, because it's the opposite of what they want to convey. And girls have their own pronouns like uchi and atashi that they can use. So saying boku is generally okay if you get the nuance behind it, but it would be conveying something intentional that could be seen as pretentious by a lot of people, especially for a foreigner to use. To some extent, it's carrying across a meaning that people that aren't already your friend might think is weird for you to be telling them. So with your friends, I would say it's completely normal to use it, and I would go for it. But to use that to your teacher might be thinking, why is this person trying to come across as a young male to me? What are they accomplishing there? And it would be seen as a little weird or too informal or too personal. So in a situation you would deem formal, I would exclusively use watashi as a male or a female for the most part. But if you're hanging out with your friends or texting someone or posting on Instagram in Japanese or something like that, boku is completely okay as long as you know the nuance it holds.
All right, thank you. That clears it up. So I'm not going to be using boku anytime soon.
It has a time and a place, but I'm going to quickly pause the recording and show you guys a clip if I can find it. I don't want to get copyright struck on YouTube, so hold on. What's this? So yeah, for those that might be watching this later, I showed the clip of the Kimi no Nawa sub versus dub for the pronoun boku ore scene. I would recommend looking that up if you're interested. But
well, that scene makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, it's out of context. It's weird, but that's kind of the first moment his friends realize that something weird is going on in that movie, and they use a very interesting quirk of the Japanese language to do that. And there's all kinds of pronouns. There's ones that old men use. There's ones that people in the countryside use. There's ones that the emperor used, that the military would have used. Most of them aren't very common anymore, but you might hear them in anime. Like you might have heard, like, I don't know, maybe in like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, somebody say "ware ware," right? That's like meaning us men, which is like what the military use, like us men will fight for Japan or something like that. So weird differentiations, but useful. Okay, more questions? Anybody?
I did. I had one about Niyaka, I think.
Yes.
That's the word?
I honestly have never seen that word before.
Yeah, I was like, you had said that it was like not common. Would you just use a different word like Genki or something? Because when I think of lively, I also think of like energetic or something. But I feel like Genki would be used for like people more than.
Yeah, that looks to be the distinction. I'm looking it up here on the Jishul sentence examples, and the examples are, yeah, his shop is in a busy section of town, or the wood is alive with birds, or my house faces a busy street. So when I think lively, I think of something that could describe a person or a place, but Genki is pretty much exclusively for people, and apparently lively is exclusively for places. I've never used it before, but I guess it is actually, it's listed as an N5 common word. So,
Yeah, I was just wondering like what the distinction was because I don't know, they just seem like very similar. Like in English, I feel like they would be synonyms.
Yeah, interchangeable for sure, but it doesn't look like they are. I think bustling is a better translation than lively for that word.
Yeah,
honestly.
see that. Yeah, kind of wish they would have listed that instead.
Yeah, or just listed both to make the distinction clear. But yeah, I mean, now that I know it, I'll probably use it. But I've never come across that word before, which is interesting. But yeah,
I was just making sure that there wasn't like a better word to use, and that's why you had like pointed it out that it wasn't as like you didn't see it that much. But
yeah, I mean, when I heard that mentioned in the book, I was thinking, well, that's just Genki, isn't it? But apparently, it's completely different. And I mean, maybe I'm the weird one for calling people lively, but that seems normal.
yeah, I mean, it does to me. I don't know.
Yeah, same here. But okay, cool, good question. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Are there more vocabulary-related questions or grammar or anything?
So you said handsome is obsolete, and yeah, it's not in the second edition. So would you use like, what would you use, like kakoi or something?
Kakoi these days. If you're talking about a guy like kare wa mecha kakoi yang, like that guy is super handsome, isn't he? Kakoi means cool, but just like kawaii means cute, but people often use it to refer to somebody that is pretty. I guess kakoi is considered handsome. So,
Fair enough.
I think they'd probably know what you're saying if you said handsame, but yeah, it's in it's not in the modern version of Genki for a reason, I reckon.
Yeah.
Good question. Any more vocab or grammar questions? We can do a little practice if you guys are interested, or we can move on to the haiku if you'd like to do that instead. Okay, let's do haiku and then some practice. So, since this haiku is a class activity, I am going to end the video here. to anybody watching this that is in the class, feel free to jump in the Discord and message me for more details about the haiku event. But thank you for joining, and see you next time.